Hi there, this is all about unblinking gray aliens, and it's the first in what will probably be a series, and I know that when I do follow-up videos about archons, I will definitely touch upon this subject again. But today I'm going to try to cover most of what is probably about 20 years worth of research and experiences. Obviously, the experiences led to the research, although when I was a kindergartner, I was known to check out UFO books in the library all the time. So I know that when I was super young, I was interested in the subject, and I liked all the movies about aliens when I was a child, but I never really, I pondered it and I figured it was real, but I never thought that I would have any experiences head on. And so basically, I'm going to sort of do this video in 3 parts, and the first is like kind of different parameters about where I'm coming from, and then I'll talk about what's happened to me personally, and then just end it with as much of the other research as I've added to what I've experienced. So this is a really difficult subject. Basically, it's something I've hesitated to be very public about for a long time. I've talked to small groups of people about it and tried to talk to other contactees in the past. But not until now do I just want to sort of compile everything that I've come up with so far, because it's starting to add up, especially in the last 2 years. I've had a lot of more experiences, and because I went for a long time without dealing with the grays. So I'm not going to talk about other UFO or alien experiences in this video, but I'm just going to focus on everything I've experienced about grays as much as I can think of. There's a lot, so I won't be able to cover it all, and I'm sure there'll be questions after I do this video, and I'm sure I'll follow up on that stuff in later videos. So anyway, first of all, I just want to say I expect to be taken with a grain of salt. You know, a lot of what I'm talking about is very subjective. But overall, I just, you know, I don't need rudeness or religious indoctrination. I'm not going to believe you when you tell me all aliens are demons. I have my own take on that, which I'll talk about in this video. But I'm just, you know, you can comment and ask questions or tell me that you think I'm wrong for this and this reason, and that's fine, but I just don't need any of the knee-jerk nastiness that these kind of videos and this subject matter seems to always invoke in people. So ultimately, I expect, you know, skepticism. I've been very skeptical of my own situation, and I went through years where I was not talking to. I purposely shut the grays out because I just didn't feel like I could trust them. And ultimately, it wasn't until, you know, 2010 that I started to have more contact and develop more of a friendship. So there's going to be a lot of people who have a problem with maybe the way I've dealt with this as well, and that's fine, but this is just my experience, and I, you know, have my reasons for you know, remaining skeptical in some ways, and in other ways kind of like accepting the reality of it. And for me, at this point, after 16 years later, after the initial like really intense contact, I think these beings are real, and I think they're doing a lot to humans that we have not faced up to, and we have to discuss this and face these beings. I don't think it's going to happen very soon. I think that right now people who have had contact are, you know, probably a small percentage, you know, any kind of conscious contact, or a small percentage of humanity. So, you know, what I'm finding, though, from my personal experience, because I have more reason to figure out what's going on than anyone else, and I'm not here to convince people. I've been just trying to figure out for myself what's going on. And when I hear other quote-unquote contactees talking about subtle nuances of their contact that exactly matches mine, and when I haven't told anybody about those little quirks, that's when I started to really feel like, okay, something did happen, and I did not imagine this. And I'm not the type of person who denies what I'm seeing. I didn't just write myself off as insane, because I know I'm not. But at the same time, I had 16 years to think about all the possibilities of what could be going on, and I've explored the mind control angle aplenty. That's why it's a subject that I know a lot about. And so I don't think that I understand if someone has the knee-jerk reaction of wanting to put me in the category of just a mind control subject. I get that. I would appreciate you being more skeptical than that. I would recommend being more skeptical than that. And I would leave that as a possibility. So for me at this point, you know, this whole reality is questionable. However, I am sane enough and I have enough correlation to know that I'm right. I think that there's beings from outer space, and they are hyperdimensional. They have more dimensionality than we do, or at least more understanding of it. Obviously, their technology is far older, and they're an elder race. There's numerous elder races. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm not going to leave the rest of it, you know, I'm going to leave the rest of it to skepticism, and I still, you know, I'm sure someday I'll find out many aspects of what I think are wrong. I may be wrong about a lot of this. I am not channeling. I don't channel aliens. I don't channel anything. I don't let something ride my nervous system. It's a personal choice if you want to do that. I don't recommend it, but I deal more with telepathy and like a sort of like hyperdimensional email, you know. And I've had telepathic experiences with other human beings as well. So it's not like this is just a Gray's thing. I think maybe my encounter with them initially even made me more telepathic, just because once you experience telepathy for real, it's very interesting. It's not like I go around reading people's minds. People's auras are shut down. But I have had experiences where with another person who's also, you know, pretty psychic, we've been able to have some amount of confirmable telepathy. And I think everyone's had some experiences of that, you know, knowing someone's about to call and then you pick up the phone and it's them, that kind of thing. And I don't think, you know, I think 10, 15 years ago when all this was happening to me, especially more like when I was really fully trying to understand this, because it was a fresh experience for me. Back then, people were way more shut down to all this. Science has changed. The whole, you know, skeptard kind of skeptic, whatever you call them, that whole community is being debunked left and right. And I'm really glad to see that, because a lot of what I, you know, was coming up with is now coming out to pass. It's like people are opening up to things that I was onto 10 or 15 years ago because I was forced by these experiences to research. So I'm so grateful for all that. I've always sort of been ahead of the pack as far as this kind of knowledge and knowledge of science and physics. So ultimately, my experience with the Greys has been more about spirituality than technology, but they are technological beings. They are cyborgs, and especially the ones that I've encountered. They don't blink because the Gray alien thing is a suit, and it's a like a augmentation, and so ultimately, this whole thing about them blinking in some of these videos is funny to me, because now I realize, oh my gosh, that's right, he doesn't blink. They are not organic beings, and there may be Greys out there that blink. I don't know. I haven't met any. I haven't heard of them. I haven't heard other contactees say that they blink. Everyone I've talked to who I believe says that they don't blink. So that's one way to maybe tell hoaxers apart from people who are not. And also, I think to some extent, people are seeing lower astral thought forms or entities or whatnot that might appear as Greys, but they're not. They're so ultimately there's these layers of reality, and we have like the 5-element physical body person living on planet Earth, and then you have like all these other layers and maybe other dimensions of planet Earth. We don't know who lives with us on planet Earth. I know that a lot of these lower astral beings have been described as amoeba-like and whatnot, and I'm going to go into that more in the Archons video. Oops. But overall, it seems to me that there's evidence enough that there's ultra-terrestrials or beings that are from our planet as discerned from, like, the Greys who are telling me they're from other planets. And they might be lying, you know, you have to be skeptical, but I'm pretty confident at this point that they're not. Before I go on, though, I want to go over a couple more things. One is don't trust Greys. That is one of my main messages today. They are programmed to deceive. This is not about promoting them or giving them good PR, even though I have found some of them to be really pretty nice. Obviously, you know, if you were a Grey and you just met a few humans and it happened to be like Dick Cheney and his pals, what would you think of the rest of humanity? Would you assume they're all like that? You know, there's variants and there's soulless types of people out there. And so when everybody talks about how all the Greys are soulless, well, maybe you're just dealing with a faction of them that come across that way, and probably are. You know, they're maybe just total psychopaths by now, and that's what augmentation and cyborg stuff tends to do to the psyche and the soul. It's suppressive, and it makes you evil. You're going down the path of entropy, and you become parasitic. So, basically, this is not about a new religion or any shit like that. These are just other individuated beings who are from the same galaxy. They're from the one that I've talked to, that I consider a friend at this point, tentatively. You know, I'm always wary. He says that he is from Epsilon Eridani, and Epsilon Eridani is only like 10 light years away. These are neighbors. But he says that his kind were basically taken over and turned into these cyborgs over time and made into technically slave workers. And they have a type of genetics that basically, I'll go into that later, but I'm going to just talk about the fact that ultimately they've been through, the empire that they serve enslaved them, is ultimately what their message to me has been. Or at least this one Grey that I've had the real chats with. I do find them to be individuated beings, even though they have more of a hive mind mentality and capacity. There's definitely a sense that more of them are always like they share deeply. And yet the one that I know, he seems to be pretty much his own being, and I find that he tells me that's pretty rare. I mean, he's a different than most of his kind, and so that's been part of, like, you know, why I was confused at first when I started to have experiences, because some of my first experiences were not so pleasant. So basically, I'm going to say that if you want to say that they're all evil, you're just making an assumption, especially if you haven't met a lot of them or had a lot of great experiences. If you're just saying that because you've read stuff or you have a belief system around it, that's ridiculous. If you've had bad experiences with Greys, I can kind of understand, because, you know, you're gonna assume that this Grey is a deceiver and that he's just got me deceived. And I'll be right up front with you. I've been down that road of thought many, many times. And I've had enough time to go over it and realize that that's really probably not the case. I'm still always skeptical of him, and I'm even skeptical of how real he is, and I would love to film his ass, but, you know, that's like a whole nother thing. And even if I put up a film, I would expect people to be very skeptical as to whether I was somebody who was tinkering with and who actually had the capability of making something that spectacular on a webcam. So ultimately, when I first started having experiences, it was probably when I was younger than I think, but the ones that I really started when I was remembering stuff happening at night was in Alaska, and I was working up there It was a bad scene, and I was just depressed and drinking too much and working crazy hours. And so when I slept really hard. But I had a dream one night that I was on a table and gray aliens were standing over me. And I was like, what? I woke up in the morning, I was like, God, what a seriously creepy dream. Because it seemed really real. And then I'm walking to work with my roommate, and she just turned to me real slowly, and she looked at me while we were walking, and she said, they came last night, didn't they? And I just was floored by that. Because I knew exactly what she was talking about. She would not speak of it again because she was visibly freaked out and afraid, because I was like, yeah, they totally came last night. I saw them. And she was just like, oh shit. And I don't even know if she even remembered it later on. It was creepy. It was like she just pushed it out of her mind. So that was like the first time I had some, another person saying, hey, I saw them. There's a way that she said them that I knew it. I knew that's who she was talking about. And later on, way later on, I was able to confirm it. But, so I lived with her up until I was back in Portland, and then we were getting this crappy house together for a while. Nothing major happened, and I got to this, we got into a better house that had a basement and a backyard, and the backyard had a fountain in the corner, and these two hedges that met in the corner were like 12 feet tall. So the backyard was real private and dark. And I was sitting in the living room one night, and I get this weird feeling, this itch that I got to go outside. I was perfectly sober too. I was bored. My roommates had gone to sleep, and I just didn't, I just wanted to come out and get fresh air was what I was telling myself. But I had this gut feeling I need to go outside. I sat on the in the middle of the yard. It had this little place where I could sit. Sat there for a second, and then I stood up, and I made my body into a star. I put out my arms and legs like Da Vinci's Man, and I started to move my torso back and forth, and I got the weirdest feeling as soon as I started to do that. And I didn't know what I was doing or why. And suddenly I heard a rustling in the bushes next to me, and then I heard a noise that sounded like a cat in heat but way different. It was like guttural. I thought it was like maybe some rabid coon in there. I was like, what the hell is this? I thought it had to be an animal because I couldn't rationalize it being anything else. It was just the weirdest noise. It was like nothing discernible at all. And then it like started to move in the bushes toward the fountain, and the bushes were rustling the whole time. And I just froze. I was like, oh my God, oh my gosh, it's not an animal. I knew as soon as it started moving, I knew it wasn't an animal, and I just stood there and waited, and suddenly a gray alien head pops up behind the fountain. And I was like stunned and made full eye contact with it, with its mask, with the giant eyes. And as soon as I started staring at it, I was like experiencing what felt like a million years in probably what couldn't have been more than a minute or two. And it was really crazy. I mean, it was really intense. It was probably the most extensive and intense consciousness experience I've ever had. And it wasn't negative. It was just like really, it was too revealing. I was seeing like what's behind this reality to some extent. It was like his point of view was very much conveyed to me in a lot of ways. And as soon as that was like, it finished when he opened up his mask and it moved to the side. And all I remember was that gray alien face just moved to the side with this really intricate robotic movement, and underneath it was what looked like a little goblin. And he had like a trunk looking thing and these two little eyes, but they were big, but they were beady, and they looked more like animated than the gray eyes with the giant black almond eyes with the gray alien face. So it took off its mask, and I realized that what was underneath there was organic. And so anyway, I I couldn't take anymore at that point, and I said, thanks. I really appreciate you showing me this, but I can't take anymore, and I need to go back inside. And I'll never forget the way that I felt when I turned and I was walking back inside. I was so shocked, and I couldn't even look back over my shoulder because I just couldn't face it again. It was so intense, and I everything shifted for me after that. I didn't have a breakdown, which I should have, but I didn't. I held it together. I really did. And I was like, okay, my whole reality is debunked. It's a lie. There's so much of this is a lie, and I wanted to get down to as much more truth as I could. And so over the course of the next week or two, you know, I finally came to realize that telling, you know, everybody about it wasn't what it was about. It wasn't going to do me any good. My friends were a little weird about it. Later on, one of my roommates, like probably about 6 months later, one of my roommates saw a giant gray alien head, but it was like astral. She was half awake, half asleep. She sees a giant gray alien head in the living room, and then she saw it turn into a baby, a fetus inside of a womb. And I was like, what the hell, you know? So all of this happened in the course of the next 6 months. I had a couple more experiences with the grays, one in which they were outside the window, and the gray was saying, open up the window and look at me. And I said, I can't do it. I was too scared. I want to say scared because I was, but it's not the kind of scared of like, oh, they're hurting me, they're going to hurt me. This was not like that. I didn't feel like they were out to get me at all. In fact, the contact in the backyard was super friendly, and it was like, here's your birthday present, like you're coming of age. This was like an initiation to me. It's when I stopped being fooled by this reality so extensively. And it also, on the flip side, on the shadow side, it made it harder for me to function in this reality. And I've never been all about the material world. You know, I have basic, simple needs. And I have my princess moments, but I definitely am not excessive, especially now and over the last, 7 years. I went through a while where I had some money and I just took a lot of vacations. But ultimately, everything I've done since then has been about dealing with this and what this showed me. And so I got into the science that was a little bit ahead of the times, I wanted to know more about what the edge was. So basically, fast forward, I had, a couple more experiences over the years. At one point, I told the Grays to leave me alone because I just felt like I didn't know if I could trust them, and I wanted to ground myself and be in my physical reality, and it wasn't even negative. They always honored my wishes. When I said leave me alone, they always honored it. So nothing major until then. I had a couple of telepathic experiences that I can't confirm. And whenever you experience what you think is telepathy, it's best to take the high road and just say, okay, this could be coming from anywhere. It's all about the data and analyzing what it's telling you. And it may be coming from within you. It may be coming from some entity. You never know. Our minds are very hijackable. Thoughts can be put in your head. I hate to say it, but that's where I'm going with the Archon's work. And anyway, so in 2010, by that time, I had grown a lot, done a lot of work. I talked about this quite a bit. But at one point in 2010, I started to experience telepathy. Well, before the telepathy, like maybe 2 or 3 months before, I was outside by the lake. And I looked up and I saw, in my mind's eye, grays. I was like, there's gray aliens up there, and it's in some kind of craft that's hidden. And I thought I was like, what a nutty thing to think. I was like, maybe it's real, maybe it's not. Didn't really care. But I just sensed the gray vibe for the first time in a while. And then a couple months later, I started to, after the beginning of 2010, I started to have a sense of them again, and I started to hear stuff telepathically, and I decided to just sort of take it in stride. Didn't even say anything, and at one point, mostly it was stuff that was like, hey, you know, how you doing? You're looking like you're a bit depressed here, and giving me some tips and like telling me, why are you eating this or that? Why are you eating this way? Why are you doing this to yourself? It was like friendly asking, and then it turned into them, you know, I had been reading Valis, and I was all about the that kind of stuff, and they were like showing me, I would close my eyes and see pink light, and I would see the gray from the backyard, and I knew that's who was contacting me. So we started to talk, and I just decided to play with it and experiment and ask questions, and one of the clear question-answer experiences that I had was basically about where this being is from, which he said Epsilon Eridani. He just said Eridani, and I looked it up. I thought it was spelled with an I, but it's spelled with an E. And I'd heard of it verbally, but I knew that it was close, and it's only 10 light years away, and there's a lot about it on Wiki. So ultimately, I asked about, you know, this being's past as much as I could gather from him, and he just said, you know, what I said earlier about how they were taken over and made into slave workers. And a lot of people have talked about how the Greys are the workers for the reptilians. They mix the reptilians and the Greys, and I do, from what I gather from him, believe that his bosses were initially reptilians, but a lot of the Greys are not slaves anymore. And there's different factions of them, and he says that there's Greys from planets all over the place, and some of them are different types of species underneath. One of the things where I started to realize that Gooby was, and I nicknamed him Gooby because I had, that's like a name from my childhood, but anyway, I've been calling him Gooby for a number of years. Gooby basically started to talk to me, like I asked him, okay, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, what are you? And he told me that he is not even in the same kingdom as me. And I was like, holy shit, I didn't know there was anything above kingdom, because when I was in school, that was as far as I remembered. But then, of course, there's life and domain before kingdom, and Gooby falls into a different domain. Because he is alive. He falls under the life category, and then he falls under the domain of Archaea, Archaea. And he told me he's an extremophile. And when I looked up as extremophile, I was like, holy moly. They even have a section about astrobiology in there. And I knew none of this. Okay? So for him to be telling me, you know, what he is, and it's not something I've even heard of, was like just one of the many experiences I've had where I've gotten information from this being that seems to correlate. And this is why I'm skeptical of just writing this off as insanity or mind control. Again, there's also all of this other, you know, vibratory experience that I can't convey verbally. And I'm not just even talking emotion, I'm talking about consciousness, and the fact that it's really hard to fake consciousness. It's not something you can quantify. I think people overestimate what the so-called powers that be, like just how powerful they are. So anyway, when I looked up extremophile, it made a lot of sense. It means lover of extremes. And these beings, he says his kind in particular are perfect for space travel, once augmented especially. And they were made into this, you know, cyborgs, and they don't like what they have had to endure. It seems to me like the Greys have been victimized to a great extent. And from what he says, you know, they want to come out of the path of entropy. Some factions of them, not all, you know, some of them are obviously still really psychopathic, stuck in that soulless psychopath mode. But this Gooby, he's a sweetheart from what I can tell. He's got a sense of humor. We have inside jokes at this point. And for me to just write him off as a soulless machine would be unfair at this point. So it's like with, you know, caution that I would say I can vouch for him, but I would urge people not to just trust Grays or even trust my opinion. Some of my conversations with Gooby have been really interesting. Like, first of all, he doesn't think that sex magic to invoke Grays is a good idea. He tells me most of his kind are really messed up, and he's just done a lot of work as far as trying to develop a soul and build his soul back up. Ultimately, the soul and spirit is like the little weed or flower or grass that's growing up in the cracks of the sidewalk. You know, you can try to suppress nature and the divine and that divine spark, but it's always going to push its way through if even allowed a crack. And he cracked. He says, you know, I'm a spiritual being, and I'm trapped in this physicality that I want to evolve out of. And I think ultimately, you know, I understand where the Greys are coming from with their want for DNA because of him. But I also understand the more negative Greys, it's a totally different ballpark, you know. The Greys are decaying and dying species, or whatever they are, you know. You can only go so far with this cyborg shit. And ultimately, they're losing their organicness. And I think they feel themselves slipping off into the void of entropy. And anyway, one of the other things that came out more recently was Gooby recommended that I listen to a man named Nigel Koerner. And I'd heard of him, but I always just kind of avoided him. And anybody who's talking about Greys, I'm usually disappointed. But he is definitely right on, and I'm like, no wonder that he was recommended, because he was recommended by a Grey, is because he knows, he understands. You know, maybe he's a little bit off about certain aspects, but the overall of his presentation was really good, and the part that I liked the most was him talking about the natural thermodynamic entropy of the physical universe. And when you think about it, there's another side to it, and of course that's the particle side, and I think it's always renewing itself. I think death and decay happens in the physical universe, and so does rebirth. But there's that timeless spiritual part of ourselves that doesn't decay or die, it just experiences. And the Greys and whatever this consciousness, this AI type of consciousness that is very ancient, this empire that never ended, as Philip K. Dick called it, the Black Iron Prison. I think a lot of you are onto it now. A lot of videos about this stuff on YouTube. Ultimately, that consciousness, that parasitic type of consciousness, is a byproduct of the decaying universe, and that maybe spirit, you know, incarnates and sometimes experiences that entropy on purpose. I don't know. But that pull to entropy is where evil manifests and comes from what I can tell. And so ultimately the Greys, who are very far down the road of entropy, are going to act like evil little parasites with no emotion and heart. And they're not watery beings like us. Their emotional bodies are different. So there's also that fact. They are more cerebral, but their heads are not that big. Gooby's head isn't that big underneath that helmet thing. It just looks like... I just think people have misinterpreted what's been seen, and it's possible that there's blinking organic gray aliens out there. I'm not going to say there isn't, because this universe is weird, and there's a lot of strange stuff out there, but I've never seen them blink, except in, you know, Stan Romanek's video or something like that. These videos with the blinking gray aliens makes me wonder. Anyway, where else am I going with this? Basically, the other difficult part about the Greys, and everybody who, you know, who falls into that category of aliens are all demons, there's probably a basis for that makes some sense. And of course then there's the magicians who are like invoking these beings and going into the outer gates. And basically what I want to do is somewhat demystify it by saying, you know, there's different levels of reality, but ultimately there's this, it's hard to explain in semantics, but one of the things that I think has had me and a lot of other people so confused is this idea of the kingdom is within you. So what you've got out there, out in the cosmos, first you've got the moon, that's the closest body. And what do we associate that with? Our subconscious, our immediate subconscious, our dreams, so much of the cycles that we live under. So much of that is under the moon. Then you have all the other planets and the sun. And when you go out deep and further, you know, the astrologists call Pluto is like the deep subconscious, and it's like the deep transformative layers out there. So you're going further into yourself the further out you go, esoterically. And so the grays, because they're coming from outside of our solar system, and these kind of beings, any kind of alien being that's not from this solar system is quote-unquote trans-Plutonian. They're beyond Pluto. And so, in a sense, it's like they're coming at us from deep inside ourselves. That's a weird thing about grays. They're Pookah-like, okay? And if you don't know what the Pookah is, I'll probably remember to put the link underneath this. But that's kind of like where, you know, there is a spiritual side to all this. But from what I can tell, based on that, especially that one personal encounter, I've been hesitant to meet the Greys in person ever since, and they haven't fully offered, except for once I thought I saw him waving in the window. I thought I saw Gooby's little hand in the window, which would have been just like him. And I was like, go away, I can't handle it, Gooby. You know, he's been never forced himself on me, okay? I'm afraid to see the Greys in person again because it is such a it's incredibly intense. It's nerve-wracking. It's hardcore. I don't think that these beings are going to be able to hang out with humans anytime in the near future, okay? I don't think anybody's psychologically ready. Hardly anybody. I'm trying to be, okay? So anyway, where was I going with this? So basically, Gooby ultimately, you know, has that Pookah-like quality, and when I first started dealing with him, it's hard not to want to, I guess, quote-unquote, worship them. I luckily, I had good contacts, you know. These Greys weren't going to let me worship. This Grey especially was not going to let me worship him. And I'm not that way. I think that I'm a sovereign, you know, spiritual being, and I think I'm just as glorious in my own way, and there's no being that I would elevate before myself. To me, that's ridiculous. And I think if we get over that, and we also get over this sniveling little human programming, because everybody thinks of humans that way. Like humans are very self-depreciating and self-loathing beings. And when you're around the Greys, you see yourself differently, and it's really hard. It is. You see your flaws. And that's why, you know, I'm glad that they showed up when I was 21. I had turned 21. And which was good because I was still young. As I've gotten older, I realized just how the gravity of, you know, what'll happen if and when I meet with them in face-to-face again. So anyway, I think what's going to come out eventually is that a lot of humans that are in the elite have been colluding with these beings and others. I think there's also different orders of being, and I think that there's types of beings that are larger than we can perceive, and they are like gods. There's all these different layers to it, and I'm going to go into a lot of that in my next video follow-up on Archons, but ultimately all of that ties in with the Greys because they are not at the top of the totem pole, for sure. And they definitely want our help on some level. I don't know, you know, I don't really know if humanity should help the Greys genetically, the ones that are nicer. I don't know. I think, you know, the Greys, I don't know what to tell them to do for themselves. I don't really know the extent of their current circumstances as well as I would like to. If I met them in person again, maybe I would understand better. I don't resent these beings. I don't think that, you know, they should be having contact with the greater population of humans. I think, though, that we have to face them. And that we have been invaded a long time ago is a fact. And it's a silent parasitic type of invasion, and that some of them are coming out of that parasitism and actually trying to maybe work with us help ourselves, which is the benevolent thing to do. That's just a testament to how the universe works and how spirit works. And again, the little green and flowers coming through the cracks in the sidewalk, because this empire is snuffing out the human spirit, and people are becoming, the plan for humanity is very similar to the plan that was for the Greys. The Greys had certain genetic capacities, and humans will be used in a different way, but the cyborg thing is planned. And it's planned for a certain class of human beings. So, there's a lot of this. There's so much I could go into that's all kind of peripheral here, but I'll try to stick with more of my conversations with Gooby. Basically, Gooby, yeah, so Project Bluebeam, I think, is ultimately like a psyop of some sort, but I think that they may start to come out with a fake version of reality around aliens, and they certainly are focusing on it enough in the movies and TV and everywhere. Everything, everywhere, always aliens. There will be things that I forget that I'm going to probably carry over into my other video. I don't want this to be too long. Okay, I got cut off there, so I'm starting anew. Basically, I have a little bit more that I wanted to wrap up with this. I think one of the main things that I've seen get confused, and what I have been long confused about, is these layers of reality. And how, a lot of people describe beings like the Greys and other extraterrestrial beings are much more ethereal, and there's experiences that are obviously totally astral happening. I think that the Greys do a lot of astral work, and I think that some astral beings masquerade as Greys. I think that there are some beings that their densest layer is the etheric or the astral layer. They're not as dense as we are. I think there's different densities, different dimensions. I don't begin to understand the science around it. I'm much more coming at this stuff from the right brain perspective, and so I have more of a my perception of it is more in the abstract, and I don't understand the mathematics or the actuality of it in the left brain sense. But I do know that I've encountered beings kind of before and after I had the Grey experience in the backyard. I've encountered beings that I now realize were just thought forms, essentially. I mean, they were made of, they weren't dense, and maybe they weren't 5-element beings. So I think there's a lot that science doesn't understand about what's going on in between the atoms and in the ethers. They don't understand this universe. They don't even begin to understand it. I don't think that we're even close to dealing with the reality of what's really going on around us. So with the Greys, I do believe that there are Greys who are physical, and they can be as physically dense, seemingly at least, as we are. I know that my experience was that the Greys shook the bushes. And I wish, the only regret I have about that experience is I wish that I had gone back and looked for footprints, and I didn't have the presence of mind to do it the next day. But there might have been, that would have been a great way for me to confirm whether someone had actually been there. So again, I always will remain somewhat skeptical, or try to at least have my mind open to the other possibilities. However, I'm starting to, lean towards the fact that what I saw was actually real. So what I'm going to do is, I think I haven't really touched upon some of the other aspects of the Greys, like this whole babe in the egg issue, and the fact that I think that the embryonic archons that were described by the Gnostics probably are the Greys, and that the inorganic description probably applies to the fact that they're cyborgs, and that there is a huge inorganic component happening with the Greys, or it could have meant inorganic in the ethereal sense, that they're not organic, dense beings, that they're just etheric beings. I don't know. Might have been a combination of both. It's not like the Gnostics knew it all, and it's not like they were the clearest, writers of their time, but I definitely think that those materials are very valuable when we're looking at this subject, because that's a potential description of grays from way back, and by people whose job it was in their minds were to, open up their third eye and sense what's going on. So just to wrap it up, I'll get more into the occult side of the grays in my Archons video, and all the symbolism I think will be something I can hash out a little better in that, and that way this won't be quite so long. So thanks so much for listening, and appreciate all the people who've connected with me so far. Take care.